Okay, I'm going to get going. Responsive to the title of the conference that brings us together for the next 2 days, I wish to reflect on the exhibition as medium. I'm going to offer a suggestion as regards what is mediated, and I'm going to extrapolate from this to what historiography or what forms of history writing might be most appropriate. I'm going to reflect on what has remained consistent in my approach to these matters over the last 15 years, and what has changed, what is different now. I go back 15 years because it was in 2007 that I started work with colleagues in London and partners across Western Europe and in the United States on the Exhibition Histories book series. There's been one Exhibition Histories book a year since 2010. So here we're looking at the covers of the first 4 books, and there have been 9 more since. We initiated the Exhibition Histories series by commissioning pretty much all at the same time these first 4 books. Every book in the series takes a particular art show or a pair or cluster of art shows from the past as a focus. Each book presents orchestrated documentation and commentary from the time, alongside commissioned essays looking back. First of all, we published a book that analysed a canonized show by Harold Zeman, When Attitudes Become Form, for the Kunsthalle Basel in 1969. However, we set this celebrated show on a par, or in other words, on an equal footing, with a deeply connected and concurrent, but comparatively marginalized show, Op losse schroeven. Roughly translated from the Dutch, Op losse schroeven means square pegs in round holes. And this exhibition took place at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. It opened a week before the Zeman show and shared many of the same artists. By extension, we went on to publish a book that looked at related but increasingly politicized and specifically feminist curatorial practice by the US art critic Lucy Lippard. We also dedicated a book to the famous and infamous curatorial project Magiciens de la Terre, or Magicians of the Earth, which claimed to be the first worldwide exhibition of contemporary art, taking place in Paris in 1989. And ahead of that, we published a paired book looking at the Havana Art Biennale as staged in that same year in the Cuban capital of 1989. The point here was that this too might be judged the first worldwide exhibition of contemporary art. On the basis of these first 4 books, I was able to retrospectively articulate our ambitions as regards a field of research and publishing in the name of Exhibition Histories. In essays in these books, I drew on the writing of Walter Benjamin for my thinking. You might say that, after his example, I saw the exhibition as a medium for cultural production, and looking at exhibitions in retrospect as a medium for cultural history. This suggestion refuses an idea which is still prevalent, that an exhibition is a relatively neutral medium by which art becomes known. My proposition here rejects any suggestion that the best an exhibition can hope for is that, looking back at them, they can be said to have made art history. So why the focus on cultural history rather than art history? Or what is at stake in suggesting that exhibition histories potentially offer art a Benjaminian model of cultural history? A core advantage of cultural history for me is its pluralization and distribution of creative agency. Art history and, hot on its heels, curatorial history emphasize the individual artist or the individual curator, as if it were possible for any one in particular to single-handedly create meaning. By contrast, exhibition history, as cultural history, stresses a collective or polyvocal enunciation, with the focus on how art, as exhibited, may develop dialogues with adjacent art, as exhibited alongside, whilst also conversing with a host environment, with curatorial rhetoric and institutional ideologies in order to address geopolitically and historically particular publics. Cultural history after Walter Benjamin is non-teleological and non-chronological. It liberates time from linearity and from continuousness. It refuses narratives of progress and decline. On this basis, we can study art in a show in Amsterdam in 1969, for example, in one book, and arts exhibition in Havana in 1989, for instance, in another, without seeking to connect these up as nodes of cultural practice. Instead, we allow them potentially independent engagements with the present. Exhibition history after Benjamin constellates a past public for art as convened by a historical show, with a public who is present now, who are looking back. Accordingly, there is no study of the past as such or as it was, only an experience with that past that disrupts the present. In other words, rather than seeking to discipline or capture or fix past shows that we study, we aim to open them back up, to allow them to challenge and complicate ideas and practice in the current moment. This is not to minimize the role of primary documents in our work, or the sometimes forensic labor involved in reaching towards past exhibitions. Our process in making the Exhibition Histories books after Benjamin admits evidence. However, what is important is the case to be made, the purpose for which evidence is marshaled, and the point for us is always to refute given historical narratives, to make counter-hegemonic moves. After Benjamin, exhibition history is both material and political as a practice. So, for example, we decentered the so-called landmark show, When Attitudes Become Fall, by carefully excavating Oplosser Schroever to set it back up alongside as an equal. But where does all my insistence on cultural history leave the relationship between exhibition histories and art history? I've characterized this relationship in several ways over the years, and it's also changed over time, not least since exhibition history has been taken up by increasing numbers of scholars and diverged in several ways from my own understanding of the field, in a way that I welcome. When I started out, I was very attached to the notion that exhibition histories operate in a minor mode within majoritarian art history. This is not to say that it's inferior or second-rate relative to art history, but instead to suggest that exhibition histories as a field has the capacity to make strange, to subvert or deterritorialize art history. As you may recognize, this thinking relied on the notion of minor literature as proposed by French philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari in their 1975 celebration of the writings of Franz Kafka. And if you'll allow me a small aside, which is flavored by my coming to Prague from Scotland, where I'm now based, then I will share my enjoyment of the fact that the first translators of Franz Kafka's work into English, Willa and Edwin Muir, were both Scottish. If I'm less passionate these days in my claims to minoritarian status for my role in exhibition histories as regards art history, then it's because I've thought more carefully about a few powerful aspects that characterize the first decade of books we produced in the series. The first aspect is the simple fact that we publish exclusively in English. In other words, in the language of contemporary art as dominated by the United States. And it's the language, of course, that I speak to you today. Secondly, and relatedly, at least for the initial 5 books in the Exhibition History series, editorial control was held tightly in London. And on into the ensuing books in the series, our primary readership, whether I was thinking this through or not at the time, was Anglo-American. Again, without much conscious awareness, we developed a rather rigid format for all our books, which later seemed problematic in at least 2 ways. First, it relied on mapping and flourished with extensive photographic documentation. which inadvertently favoured curatorial projects in the West, First World, or Global North, where records were more richly available. Second, all the books in the series started to look the same, implying a disciplinary regime was trumping the material under study. So here you can see the first 9 books in the Exhibition History series, and the similarity of the cover design suggests something of this regimented mindset that we'd inadvertently developed for ourselves. Perhaps the key to transforming our ideas about what exhibition histories might be was the decision to start inviting our leading authors to co-edit the books with us. Considering apartment art shows in Moscow in the 1980s, for example, we worked with Russian art historian Margarita Dupichin. This mostly proved to highlight the art historical foundations of our processes for exhibition histories up to that date. By contrast, considering the so-called cannibalism art biennial staged in Sao Paulo in 1998, we worked with Brazilian curator Lizete Lagnado. And this helped us to broaden our conceptions of process beyond that conventionally pursued in the name of art history. Then, for book 9 in the series, we worked with David Tay on an artist-led curatorial initiative in northern Thailand in the mid-1990s, which he brought to our attention. As a curator, critic, and historian, David really helped us think through a mode of exhibition histories that was relevant not only to Anglo-America, but also to Southeast Asia. However, the book I want to linger on as particularly transformative for my understanding of exhibition histories and its possibilities is book 10 in the series. A vast tome devoted to Festac, the World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, staged in Lagos in 1977. This book was co-published with Chimurenga in Cape Town, South Africa, and the result of a decade of research and editorial labor by Ntone Ejebe, Chimurenga's founder. This is one double-page spread, a tiny example to try and give some sense of Chimurenga's achievements in this book. Here we're looking at the reproduction of a painting by Sudanese artist Ibrahim El Salahi, titled The Last Sound, which was displayed in Festac. You can also see a highly concise, newly commissioned text, which entangles art history, film history, exhibition history, oral history, African history, and Arabic history, while entirely lancing the present moment and Anglo-American history. And that's the whole text you're looking at. It's not an excerpt. It fits entirely on the page. To the far left, what we're looking at is a resonant snippet of lyrics from a US pop song from 1980. And I've just enlarged it here. Semantics is always a bitch. Places once referred to as underdeveloped are now called mineral rich. And the game goes on eternally. Unity kept just beyond reach. Egypt and Libya used to be in Africa. They've been moved to the Middle East. I can't tell you exactly why these three things, the painting, the essay, and the lyrics, come together to recreate the energy and punch of Festac, but they surely do, at least for me. There are at least 4 lessons that this book taught me. 1, the strength of including cultural practices that exceed conventional definitions of art as anchored in Euro-American tradition. 2, to think about the likely readership or audience for the work that we do. This book explicitly addressed insiders, initiates, and fans, the many, many thousands who knew of Festac already, rather than assuming it is possible to evenly address a lay public, some quasi-universal, anyone and everyone. 3, privileging a multilingual reader. For the Festac book, nothing was translated out of its original language, and many languages were included. 4, the success of mercurial rather than disciplinary practices when it comes to historiography. Or perhaps rather than historiography, the act or art of remembering. In other words, the relevance of creative responses to creative past events, the importance of work that is studious rather than academicist, proving both playful and deeply serious. In other words, perhaps, while the writing of Walter Benjamin inspired my move into exhibition histories, the editorial work of Ntone Ajebe and his Chimurenga colleagues keeps me inspired in the field today. So where does this leave the relationship with art history? Well, I believe it's moved me on from worrying too much about defining my methodology. And I want to share a quote that encapsulates this with you. I'm trying to think beyond what is your method to who is gathered by your invitation. And of course, today I wish to gather you all as scholars interested in the exhibition as medium in the block. And yet I'm here as an interloper with no particular expertise in art and its presentation in Central and Eastern Europe. Nevertheless, for the time remaining, let me draw on my expertise in shows elsewhere in order to try and say something about how the art of the block might be productively mediated by looking back at exhibitions today. And the first thing I'm going to say is that, don't worry, I'm not going to revisit Magician de la Terre in Paris in '89 and try to center the work of Karel Mallich, which was included in that famous and infamous so-called global survey show. The second thing I want to say is that I'm about to offer sketches only, or working notes in progress. These are not histories I have researched extensively, but I hope they might nonetheless bring us together. And I've got 2 exhibition examples to share. The first is Between Man and Matter, curated by Yusuke Nakahara for the 10th Tokyo Biennale of 1970, and then touring to 3 further cities in Japan. In the generous spaces of the Tokyo Metropolitan Art Gallery, each of the participating artists was given their own dedicated room, and the list of those included overlaps significantly with artists in both When Attitudes Become Form and Oplosche Schroever. So here we're looking at a map of Between Man and Matter, and it's drawn by Yoko Watanabe on the basis of her meticulous archival research. So you can see the work of Richard Serra, Carl Andre, Sol LeWitt from the US, for example, also Mario Merz from Italy, Daniel Buren from France, Hij van Elk from the Netherlands. But what is interesting about this show for our present purposes is that the division of Europe into East and West is not so hard and fast when viewed from Tokyo in 1970. Nakahara, the Japanese curator, was friends with Wim Berin, who curated Oplosche Schroever, and he might have caught When Attitudes Become Form when it toured to London. Nevertheless, he didn't follow these other shows in privileging art from Western Europe at the expense of that from this side of the Iron Curtain. Specifically, he included the work of Edward Krasinski and Stanislav Kolibal. I tried to get that prepped. So you can see their work highlighted here. This is the shot included in the exhibition catalogue which documents the show. If I were to start my own process of exhibition histories from here and for now, I would want to investigate the work adjacent to Kolibal's by Koji and Okura. You can see they're in close proximity on the map. To be frank, I know little about the work of either Kolibal, I can't say it, Kolibal, there we go, it's my best attempt, folks, or Okura. But what is clear is that the Japanese artist was young to be included in this major exhibition, while also a prominent member of the Mono-Ha group, which I'd want to investigate in relation to Ube van Arts. UB12, did that even register as in my terrible accent? So 2 individual artists, both working as part of groups, coming together in this international context. I'd want to look at how they interacted in that context. Via the architecture and decoration of the museum building, I might research each artist's work in relation to natural and industrial materials, or in relation to geopolitically inflected forms and ideologies of modernity. Then there's the curatorial umbrella of between man and matter to consider, and the international cultural context of the Tokyo Biennial. Ideally, I'd wander the museum as it is now, pace the streets locally, talk to people who remember the show or find it meaningful today. I'd interrogate the neglect of female artists and fold in likely but overlooked protagonists back into the event after the event. I'd find out where else that this work of Coulibaly has been exhibited and reflect on the difference of signification in different contexts. Finally, in some way I cannot predict without first going through this process of research, I would hope to respond in a creative or imaginative way, as well as an analytical way. Through imagination and analysis, I would work again to deny claims for when attitudes become form to be the center of Anglo-American gravity as regards the curatorial practice and art of this moment in time. My final case study, sketched out with the hope of demonstrating how exhibition histories might bring us together here and now, shifts us to Glasgow, in my adopted home nation of Scotland, in 1990. This was the year in which the industrial port city of Glasgow held the title of European Culture of Capital. Capital of Culture, there's a reason why I made that slip, which I'm about to explain. European Capital of Culture. This initiative mobilized a £15 million budget. However, the City Council allocated only 1% of this to funding local art events and was therefore deeply unpopular amongst those activating the burgeoning art scene in Glasgow at the time. Nevertheless, it prompted artistic responses that, while targeting the issues the European initiative brought to town, nevertheless enriched the public offer that year. So, for example, Ross Sinclair, then studying at Glasgow School of Art, fly-posted sites across the city. He slapped up paired slogans reading Capital of Culture and, more challengingly, Culture of Capital. There's my slip earlier. In a related but more focused and concerted effort, fellow Glaswegian artist Alan Dunn managed to secure access to an advertising hoarding at a train station for a year, and he invited numerous contributors to take turns filling this with art. So here, top left, you can see the empty hoarding or billboard on the far platform across from the station waiting room. Every week or few weeks, a new artwork was installed on that billboard, and over the course of the year in which Glasgow was European Capital of Culture. And this is the work of Pavel Buchler, who had come to the UK from Prague in 1981 and would become an influential head of art at Glasgow School of Art in 1992. In the first of 3 sequential artistic contributions by Buchler to the Belgrove billboard, the sign read Northern, written back to front. So when you see it in the window, it's reversed and you can read it more easily. And then, for the second week of Buchler's installation, the bottom half of his sign was replaced as another somewhat formally similar word was introduced. And then for the final week, the second word became clear, replacing the first and reading horizon back to front. When I say that I here see the work of a Central European artist, passionately committed to UK practice outside of or north of London, this is not intended as a biographical reading, so much as a statement of how geography as well as geopolitics informs culture, both richly and contentiously. What might exhibition histories have to offer this show of contemporary art? How to be both faithful and felicitous in translating this durational curatorial project into the present. For a start, I don't think I'd work with this particular trio of images, however complete and explanatory as regards Buchler's work. It gives too much information all at the same time. and risks ending discussion rather than opening it up. Instead, I might well use the following pairing, which unites Buchler's contribution with that of Ross Sinclair. Although hard to discern in black and white, Sinclair drained the flag of the United Kingdom of all its red, leaving only the blue and white of the Scottish flag, haunted by the ghost of the English flag. We are thereby given the empty cardinal points of a derailed compass and a horizon line that reflects north onto south, south onto north. This then is accompanied by the muted but sustained pain of an ache. How to expand upon the fruitful and controversial national and regional stakes as articulated here in Glasgow, in the year the city claimed the title of European Capital of Culture. For my exhibition history, I would certainly want to revisit, among other things, the discussions enlivening the Points East Conference at the Third Eye Centre in Glasgow in December 1990. This event drew together over 100 artists, curators, critics, art historians, museum directors, and officials from the UK and from Eastern Europe to inquire into the cultural possibilities inaugurated by the fall of the Iron Curtain the year before. To conclude and reiterate, I cannot present polished arguments about how the artwork of these Czech nationals operated in these past exhibitions in ways that are urgent to our present. However, I'm happy to hazard that researching these exhibition histories might productively throw into relief conceptions of national, international, and transnational culture today, both within Europe and transcontinentally. If the work of Walter Benjamin and Antonia Djebe have been the lodestars for my presentation today, then I now want to end with the work of Gita Kapoor in order to wrap up. In a conference about exhibition history staged in London with respect to South Asian art back in 2016, Gita Kapoor found a moment in the discussion following a particular presentation in order to jump in and point out some risks. With devastating eloquence and dazzling conviction, she flagged the limitations of work that is merely descriptive of past exhibitions, however rigorously and extensively researched. In other words, however sincerely descriptive. She made it clear that if no extrapolative moves were made, making timely action now, nor facilitating discursive renderings in the present, then we have failed. This is a summary of her quote, and that's how I want to conclude. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry I'm losing my voice, but before you clap, I want to say one more thing. I really hope that you can come to me with questions. If not immediately, then of course the next 2 days. And if you're following online and want to email me, that is more than welcome too. Thank you.